Hello, everyone. This is Eric Pennington, and welcome to the Spirit of EQ podcast. We're glad that you've tuned in. A few things we wanted to tell you at the beginning of the show, and that's this podcast was created to be a tool to help you, primarily to discover and grow your EQ. Science and our own lived experiences confirm that the better we are at managing our emotions, the better we're going to be at making decisions, which leads to a better life. And that's something we all want. We're glad that you've taken out the time today to listen and hope that something that you hear will lead to a breakthrough. Hey, one last thing. We'd really appreciate a review on whichever platform you use to listen. And if you want to, leave some comments about what you heard today, as well as follow and subscribe. That way you won't miss a single episode as we continue this journey. And with that, the show begins. Jeff, it's good to see you again.
Hi, Eric. Nice seeing you.
I'm just trying to think when I might have brought this up to you. I think I did in a conversation. I might be missing the mark on that. But you ever wonder about what blocks people from starting something?
That's never happened in my life. So
me either. I am totally unrelated to my life, right?
Brett, do you know? Producer's shaking his head, so I don't know.
So, and typically this gets lumped into about people don't like change, people are afraid of change. And I've even really started to really question that whole type of approach, how we tend to pull it out so flippantly toward people, about change. But I've been thinking about this a lot lately because I have a friend who, at times, and I say this without judgment, because I've been there, and it really kind of illuminates that period of my life when he seemed to be in this perpetual state of I'm going to do it, and then he doesn't do it. I'm going to start it, and then something. It's always that begin, stop, and not really making any progress, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I've known him long enough to where time has passed enough to where he's getting to an age where if he's not careful, he might just say, I'm too old, it's too late, I should focus on my retirement, I should focus on, get my kids through college, those statements that people make. Almost a quasi, that's what, if I were younger and if I were single, that kind of thing. But I think another thing that's involved in the stopping us from starting something. And Jeff, when I talk about starting something, it's not just a business idea. That it could be that. It could also be, I'm going to start exercising, or if I'm going to change my diet, or it could be, I need to build a new neural pathway, how I think about this particular group of people or whatever. And these things all sound very inspiring when we announce to the world that I'm going to do this, which might make you think maybe we should be a little more cautious about announcing to the world what we're going to do before we've even done anything. And for our friends in the social media world, I know you guys live off of that kind of thing, but in reality, I think sometimes maybe we should be. But I'm thinking in terms of lately examining how our brain processes when we come to the table with a change, or we want to do something different, or we want to start something, right? And I kind of liken it to, even as we're in the studio today, we're sitting at a table with microphones, and if you were my brain and you were sitting at the table and I sit down and say, okay, brain, I'm thinking of starting a new side hustle, or I'm thinking about starting a new type of diet, or I'm gonna start spending more time in nature. You'd probably say, Jeff, well, those are good ideas,
right? Yeah,
right. We all would, right? It feels good.
Yeah, all of us. Let's do them all tomorrow,
right? But our brain is probably going to do the hold on, time out, And it's probably calling on our nervous system to help put that block in. Now, I have always been fascinated. And for our audience, much of what I'm going to be saying in this episode is around theory and my lived experience. I'm not making proclamations that there were 20 studies done that showed that if you do this, you get that. I'm talking about it from an experience perspective. And I go, because that's what I've encountered. In that meeting, it felt awesome. It was inspiring. And then, I'm in the car and maybe I've driven for a couple of miles, and then all of a sudden I'm starting to go, I just don't know. Maybe, it wouldn't be the worst if I, I'm starting to, and where's this coming from?
You're making me think of the two little people on your shoulder.
Right. Yeah.
One's in this here going,
devil. Yeah. Right.
And
Yeah.
Motivation and inertia, or I don't know what you'd call them.
But they're there, right? And I believe, at least in my experience, as someone who has stopped, our brain is a very powerful operating system. And I think it would be one thing, Jeff, and here's the good news, right? Here's the upside of what we're going to what we are talking about today, and that is that we can change. Our brain has all of this plasticity that, though it may be at the front end was very resistant to the idea, can at some point, and everybody's different, can become an ally in this thing that initially we got all this resistance from, right? So before we start getting into kind of some of the ideas around starting things and what's influencing that, and maybe how some tips, I'm going to get into how did we get to a place where starting something would be considered dangerous or risky?
We're too comfortable.
And where do you suppose the comfort came from? This, we're too comfortable. Where did that come from, do you think?
There's a lot of different ways to think about that. Part of the comfort could be from people going, you're doing great the way you are. Fantastic. And all that. The other comfort could come from the people going, they're the little person on your shoulder going, why would you do that? Do you know what can happen if you do this? These are the things that,
I swear, Jeff, you must have been in my head on Saturday. Because you just alluded to something that's very central to this, right? This idea of belonging. And belonging not in the sense of how we use it or the term inside of the SEQ model, but belonging in the sense of like society, community. We all want to feel like we belong, right? That we're not, we don't like the idea of being outside of the camp, right? An outsider. And you and I know this just if we go back in time, because if you were cast out of the tribe, you would die. You needed the clan. You needed the community. It was a mutual survival thing.
You couldn't go to the big box survival store.
Right, exactly, right? However, someone might, well, wait a minute, we don't live in a time when, but isn't it interesting how very rare it is for someone to go against the grain, to speak a different opinion, right?
You were making me think of the way big advancements are happening are the people that are outside that decided, I'm going to do this. I know a lot of people have problems with Elon Musk, but he goes, I'm going to build rockets. I don't care what people think.
Yeah. And you can list multiple others, right? Who were, Steve Jobs was an example of that from Apple. And I think what I have found is, some people have a bit of an advantage in that department. And you might be able to look at personality tests and say, well, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, the way that they're wired, they tend to have more of an attitude that, hey, I really don't care if you like it or don't like it. I'm going to do it anyway, right? However, when I think about it from my own perspective, the idea of not being, it's kind of a chapter thing. I had many early chapters. I very much wanted to be able to say that I checked all these different boxes.
Mm-hmm.
I have this, I have that, I am this, I am that. This is what I do for a living, all these things. My big wake-up call is that I kind of saw through the marketing side of it. And I'll give you a great example. When my wife and I first got married, one of the big dreams for us was to buy our first home.
Mm-hmm.
We were living in an apartment. It was nice, but it was an apartment. 2 people above you, on the side of you.
Mm-hmm.
Some were peaceful, some were loud. I mean, you know the drill.
Yeah.
So we got the first home. Oh, man, it was awesome. It was great. Our first home. And it was. I mean, and, being newly married, the whole deal. And then it moved into, we want to have kids. Well, this house is not big enough so we need a bigger home. All right. So we did that. Now, many of those messages, some of them were appropriate because, legitimately, if you had kids,
Mm-hmm.
the first house we were in was not going to accommodate that very well. So, all right, you do that. And as time is moving on, your income is growing, you can afford more and all the rest. And then once you get there, well, do you ever have any thoughts about a dream home? Well, again, if things are progressing economically, and on and on and on, and then you put all this effort, all this money into the dream home. And Jeff, this was the one that really opened my eyes. After you're in the dream home and years pass and you get older, then someone says, you ought to think about downsizing. And I'm going, hold on, wait a minute. I've lived long enough to realize I'm seeing a pattern here. Right? And it really got me thinking. This messaging is designed to make me spend, make me do in order to feel like I belong.
You're being extrinsically motivated.
Exactly. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I've said this to my wife, I don't want to hear any more of it. I might downsize, and I might not.
But you do it because you want to.
Right. I don't have my antenna now is turned down to those messages, which are all designed in that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if that example is just one little micro of, well, what happens when the person who's maybe middle-aged and says, you know what, I want to start this business. And it's going to be involved in, I've been doing this for years and I think this could work. I want to try it. Typically the messages that will start to come is the same kind. Oh no, you've got kids to put through school. Oh no, you got to think about retirement. And my gosh, you don't want to be poor in retirement, Jeff. Well, if Jeff wants to belong, if he doesn't want to be ostracized, Jeff will begin to, it was a good idea, but, it probably wouldn't work. I mean, look how many businesses fail. I hear 90% of startups fail in the first 2 years, so I don't want that to happen to my kids and my wife and my family, on and on,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Exactly.
Now, you'd say, but Eric, you should be vigilant enough to push that aside and rock on. But Jeff, it plays also into our brain's desire to protect us.
Right.
For things to be easy and efficient, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially the protect thing, right? So I think we got there from societal. I think we also got there because of our wiring. What do you think? Do you think there are other things at play here?
I think stagnation.
Okay.
If you've ever looked at a river or a stream, what happens when it stops flowing? There's still water there, but it's not moving anymore. what happens to that water?
I may get this totally wrong, but when I think of that, I think of all that green. It just becomes discolored.
It gets yucky.
Yeah.
Fish start dying. Just all that.
I like the way you're going with this because it's this idea of the flow. It needs flow.
It smells bad.
Yeah.
You're not going to want to have anything to do with that because it's stagnant. But I think what happens to us is we let the flow stop, whatever that flow is. Whether it's the flow of starting a new business, you got to keep that water moving. Openness to the flow. Whether you're starting a new diet or whatever it is that you're talking about, if you don't have that flow, you're going to get stagnant. And I think that's a problem we have now is a lot of society is stagnant because they're not allowing flow because you never know for sure what's coming in that flow.
Sure.
But the only way you ever cannot be stagnant is to allow the flow.
Well, and I can speak to a bit about, this idea of not knowing having the unknown of what's coming, right? My son had just graduated college, so my message here for college age students, right? When you hit a wall, when you have a disappointment, that's just a part of your story. It's not the entire story. I'm not saying you got to like it because I wouldn't either, fill in the blank with the situation. But understand, it's not the entirety of the story.
Right.
It plays a part. It's kind of like if you're reading a really good book and you get to a part where somebody in the book is, maybe they're killed off or whatever, and you say, I'm not reading this book anymore.
Right.
Well, that's just one part. That's a part of a chapter that's made up of 20 chapters.
Right.
Don't give up on the book. Just realize you were disappointed, it didn't go the way you wanted or whatever, and then begin again. And for those out there that may think, well, Eric, but wait a minute, I've tried and then it goes, I got some things for you here in a little bit that I think might explain a bit about why and then what we can do in light of that will help you have the strength, the energy to move past it to the next thing. But I do believe there is this part of this stagnation that can happen comes from people experience, sort of the downside of life, and they forget that it's a part. And for many of us, Jeff, if we live long enough, we probably will struggle to remember. It'll be a little blip in the timeline. Well, I'm not saying you look back to it with fondness. We don't celebrate that, oh yeah, 10 years ago I lost my job. You don't celebrate it, but more than likely 10 years on, you have a different job and it might be a better job than you had 10 years ago. And, fill in the blank.
We just recorded an episode where somebody went through something and I won't get into too much detail, but she actually was able to thank this thing that caused her problems because it made her grow and move ahead. So I think that's where we're missing the boat in today's world is we give up when we hit that wall or we give up when the water quits flowing.
Yeah. And again, I'm going to draw this back to the brain and how it operates. The brain doesn't want you to feel that. The brain does not want you, and maybe primarily the nervous system, it does not want you to experience that loss.
Right.
Because its job to protect you and keep you safe.
Not just from bears, but...
Right. Yeah, exactly. And we'll be back to the episode after this. And now, back to the episode.
So, Eric, I've heard about this thing called EQ cohorts. What in the world is that?
Well, Jeff, as you know, we offer our audiences, our clients, prospective clients, a multitude of different ways that they can improve their emotional intelligence. One of the best ways is through a cohort. Basically what it is you have typically, and I say typically because every client can be different. What happens is that the senior level leader, who maybe has 8 or 9, maybe 10 direct reports, whatever it may be, and wants to start down the path of building a practice around EQ. And they understand, Jeff, that you can't get that done by just doing a half-day workshop and getting a workbook. Oh. We've talked about that many times before.
Yes, we have.
Right? So it's a great way for them to go deep and to build sort of a community around the building of a practice. They help one another. Frequency is typically, the entirety of it is 9 months to 12 months, meeting once a month, group session, individual coaching sessions with some content that we supply them along the way. Again, the whole goal, build a practice around EQ.
So why do you think it's important to do it as a cohort?
Well, what we have found is that when left to just one-off situations, and we're not against workshops or doing a quick micro session on the importance of EQ or keynotes, we just found that most organizations want to get to a place where they move beyond just getting the information to where they're actually changing, where there's behavior change, where they're actually practicing EQ.
So I am sure everybody listening right now is asking this question. How do we find more out about that?
Well, the easy way is to just info@Spirit of EQ and just mention that you heard about it on the podcast and you want to learn more about what that's all about. You'll get what you need. We'll get it back in touch with you very quickly.
Thank you, Eric.
You're welcome. So, Jeff, here's some tips that I want to throw out to the audience for you and for me. Some of this is reinforcement for me. Maybe it'll be new to others. You can try them. It may not work for you. Man, it's cool. I don't come with any preconceived, but I wanted to share it. So there's this little, I'm going to call it a brain hack.
Okay.
Right?
I'm anxious to hear this.
Okay. So I've been reading and listening to different, quote, authorities, experts, that kind of thing in the side of the neuroscience world. And one of them relates, the subject matter relates to where your brain gets its sort of best guess of what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm stealing from Lisa Feldman Barrett. That's kind of a term I heard from her, that our brain operates on best guesses. And that drives some people crazy because we want to think that our brain is just this, oh, it's Jeff East and Jeff is from here, so here's what we do because we don't want Jeff to feel bad, so we do this, right? So, example, when we encounter something that makes us angry, disappoints us, makes us sad, your brain is going to kick off the emotion that it feels is a best guess of what's required for that situation.
Mm-hmm.
And Jeff, guess where your brain's going to for that guess?
Well, tell me.
Probably when you were about 8 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Now you'd say, but wait a minute, why doesn't the brain go to today? We're mature adults and we know Jeff needs support and empathy and blah, blah, blah. But what we don't realize is that over time, our brains they're not evolving, right? There's not this, we're not creating new operating systems. This is the one we got.
And it's going to go back to version 1.0.
It's going to go to old software.
Mm-hmm.
Because guess what? When you were 8 years old and you were scared out of your mind, we got to protect Jeff. We got to keep him safe.
Mm-hmm.
So Jeff, what happens when you're 48 years old and you encounter something that makes you think about our brain's going to go to the 8-year-old?
Excuse me for this, but you're going to metaphorically pee your pants.
If your brains, and again, our audience, we're talking about theory. We're talking about lived experience.
Mm.
I'm sure anyone could pick apart what I'm saying and say, well, that's not scientifically true, and it's this. I'm going by my own experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to explain that personally here in a moment. But you make a great observation there, Jeff. If the brain feels the best way to protect you and to keep you safe is to pee your pants, that's what your body's going to call on.
Right.
That's what it's going to do, right? So, what if there were new software, Jeff? What if we gave our brain new software to call on? Not the 8-year-old software when we were 8 years old, but new software that was introduced like now.
The first thing we would have to be willing to do is allow it to be installed.
That's a great observation. You're right.
You have to be willing.
Right. Because it's not as simple as, oh, I'll take that software, download software, insert, and go.
Yeah, we don't have a USB port.
Right.
Yet.
We don't. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how, right?
Okay.
Okay. And I'm going to go at it from my experience. Once again, I know I'm stressing that real heavy. I feel for our audience, I don't want them to get even a whiff that potentially I'm trying to clinically advise as to what to do. So my lived experience. So when I was growing up, Jeff, one of the issues that I dealt with was abandonment, and abandonment within my family unit.
Okay.
And I never experienced long-term abandonment. I wasn't in foster care and any of those things, which I think for our audience, for everyone, those folks need a tremendous amount of empathy because that's really, really hard. But for me, I did experience it, right? And much of that time never got resolved. Much of those issues never got resolved, right? Never got resolved over time. And like many things in life, as human beings, we think we're clever. We think that, well, I put that in that box and it's down in the basement in the corner beneath like 5 other boxes.
You wrapped it in tape and...
Oh, it's all good. Just it's somewhere. No, it doesn't work that way. It stays with you. Mm-hmm. And I think over time, we trick ourselves into believing it's not an issue. It's not an issue. It's not an issue. I'm okay. And part of the reason why I do believe we can be so resistant to therapy. I am very, very thankful that the God I follow is full of a lot of grace. Mm-hmm. That though I'm running, he's okay with it because he knows eventually he'll maneuver certain circumstances, certain people into my life that have the potential to get my attention so that I'd be willing to look at that. Because abandonment is traumatic. There's no getting around it. It's a trauma, right? So I'd heard this professional talk about going back and visiting that 8-year-old, that 9-year-old, and providing them with what you as an adult would provide an 8-year-old who is experiencing that. Mm-hmm. So, for example, that would mean that Eric would go back in time and be with that 8-year-old, 9-year-old who's experiencing that and explaining to him and encouraging him and helping him to understand it's okay. Mm-hmm. It was a one time, it was a moment in time, it was part of the story. You didn't do anything wrong. It wasn't your fault. You can move on now. Mm-hmm. And who better to tell that 8-year-old version of Eric than the adult Eric, who now is understanding things that he couldn't before. It was like so profound, Jeff. Now here's a very, very key thing. You have to do it with curiosity and not judgment. Mm-hmm. You have to be willing to be curious about something that was very difficult. My experience. I decided that I would go visit him. I decided that though that was a traumatic time, there was a lot of stuff that went on, I was able to find him, put my hand on his shoulder, and let him know. Now you say, well, what good did that do you? 2 things. Other relationships are in the process of being freed from my fear of abandonment, because that's what happened, Jeff. I always carried it with me. I always thought that people were always looking for the exit sign, even those closest to me, even those that told me they loved me, even those that reminded me of how important I was to them. There was always something in me, and that was that 8-year-old software. That's what that was. My brain was calling on it. Okay, everybody's looking for an exit sign.
Eric 1.0.
Yeah, right. So, Jeff, yes, we can. We can change the software. Mm-hmm. We can uninstall and reinstall, or I would say reinstall. We can uninstall and then install new software that says, not everyone is going to abandon me, Jeff. Not everybody's looking for the exit sign. Some people will, but you know what I'm saying?
Okay, with what you're talking about, do you think that the life experiences you've had from being when you were 8 to now of the people that didn't abandon you is allowing you to make that software update?
I don't think so. No, I
Okay.
think it's really been a case of Eric with Eric.
Okay.
Eric needed to understand that was a moment in time. That was, and that goes for even who abandoned me when I was that age.
Mm-hmm.
That I could look at them with empathy. That I could not feel that it's important for me to judge them for where they went wrong and what they didn't do and what they should have done. And that's really quite revolutionary in our current age. Where canceling and banishing and all this stuff is such a prevalent thing. I was able to see that person with different eyes. So I think for me it was truly a one-to-one thing to get me to understand. Because yes, Jeff, there are some people that can and will abandon me.
Mm-hmm.
This is not a game of no risk. There's always that possibility. But I have enough evidence in my relationships to feel confident that I don't need to be looking over my shoulder or looking at you, Jeff, going, wait a minute, why did you turn to the right and there's an exit sign? Right? Right? I don't need to do that. And some people say, but what if Jeff does? And what if your brother, your sister, your wife? Well, then that will be something I'll be able to deal with as an adult, to understand that, yes, it happens, but guess what? It doesn't happen every time with every person.
Being an adult and being able to, trying to think of the right word, dispassionately maybe might fit, to look at this situation. If somebody abandons you, to be able to actually take the time to examine it and go, wait a minute, you know what? They didn't abandon me because I did something wrong. They're dealing with something. To whatever that is, just to have that ability as an adult, rewired, updated software, to look at it in a different way.
And that's where the power of the curiosity comes in. Because absent curiosity, I believe we just default to judgment. That was wrong. I won't. I can't. I'm not. Curiosity says, well, I wonder, Jeff, if you've got a point there. Maybe I don't know enough of what they were experiencing. Maybe they were having a difficult time. And maybe there was something from their parents. Maybe, and again, we get into this mindset that we feel like we've got to be the arbiters of all justice. And we don't know much of anything.
We can't even deal with the justice in ourselves.
I mean, let alone to start saying to the world, hey, you and you and you. That part, yeah. And I think, Jeff, it really does, for me, what it came down to is install some new software. And the only way you can do that is to go back to where the trauma began, because it's a process of transformation. Now, for those in the audience that are out there, say, I don't think I can go there because you may have had abandonment, but mine was much worse, much deeper, much more. That's why we have therapists who can help.
Exactly.
That's where you can get someone who has expertise, maybe in somatic therapy, who can help you walk through the process and come out on the other side. And I really do believe, Jeff, that and this was really, really, it was rather daunting to me and still is what happens if I don't? I can't imagine going through life in my relationships with one eye at the door, watching for someone to bolt. And we haven't even talked about the physical toll that this will take. There is a lot of science, true science, about the impact of how our nervous system, by it going to that old software, what it does to us physically.
Mm-hmm.
And our brain is made in such a way that it will accept the new software. It will.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is the trick, part of it. People will say, well, I've been trying, I've been working on it, and it doesn't seem to be, that's okay. It does take time.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe our focus, Jeff, is focused, or maybe, how would I say this a little better? Maybe we should pay attention to daily progress.
Exactly.
Maybe you don't have to fix everything tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow you just need to maybe get 1 or 2% better than today. And then the next day, another 2%. The day after that, maybe you get 4.
Yeah, because that 2 or 4 or 6% that you've made the way you want, made better, I hate to use that term, is going to allow you now to make bigger gains and bigger gains.
And Jeff, as I steal from Bill Ackman, the hedge fund manager, progress, like money, compounds.
Mm-hmm.
That whole idea. You remember what they would tell us when you got the 401k at work? See, this is why you make regular investments, because it compounds over time. It's not right. Same here. Mm-hmm. So maybe, Jeff, if we don't get attached to, well, when can I be in a position where I no longer feel like people are going to abandon me? I didn't do that. I didn't make that my focus. My focus is I want to continually get a little bit better at this every day.
You know, one of our competencies is consequential thinking,
Mm-hmm.
and we kind of tend to go to the consequences being negative.
Right.
We need to look at consequential thinking from the positive.
Yeah.
Okay, I did this, and because of this consequence, I'm moving ahead. And because of this consequence, I'm moving ahead, I can take 2 steps tomorrow.
Right. And Jeff, I think there's another implied here is empathy,
Mm-hmm.
self-empathy. You may have a day, I know I have, where it seemed like I was almost at the verge of paranoia about the thing. But you know what? At the end of that day, what I'm going to do tomorrow is I'm going to try to get a little bit better at this. Because when you compound progress, just because you have a bad day does not erase everything you did before. It just means you had a little less progress than you did.
Took a day off.
Yeah.
You know, we tend to look at other people and go, oh, they're only human. But do we ever look at ourselves?
Yeah.
I'm only human.
Yeah. Yeah. We weren't designed to just solve things tomorrow. That's the fool's gold of AI for many. That's not how the world works. And I would tell you, as a last thing, as a tip, and that is community. Having people around you that you can have these conversations with, having professionals potentially who can help you navigate it. Because I think if you try to go it alone, you position yourself for your brain to just go back to the old software.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember whoever this people are that are helping you.
Yep.
It's not their job to just talk blue sky and rainbows.
Right.
They go, okay, Eric, you're starting to do this now. You do realize that everybody is going to struggle with whatever it is.
Yep.
But that's normal. It's not because you're not doing it well or you're not good at it. You're learning it. You're going to struggle, whether it's starting a business, starting a diet, starting anything.
Yeah. And, Jeff, you know how I am about exercise. So today was a day of lifting weights. I'd love to tell you it was as easy as snapping my fingers and just moving my leg a little bit and then sitting down and watching a little ESPN. It was no big deal. It was over in 30 minutes. No, it was hard. And it was hard. But you know what I'm doing? I'm tearing and breaking down my muscle so that I can grow more muscle.
And what would have happened if somebody would have told you, Eric, you're never going to feel any pain You're never going to sweat. It's going to be perfect. What if somebody told you that?
Right. Well, besides the fact that they would be lying, as I know you're kind of in a veiled way saying, it would also it would rob me of the understanding of what growth means. And I do believe that is a problem within our current society, that we give people impressions like, well, Jeff, you've been working on this thing for like 3 months. Why aren't you better now? I mean, don't get me wrong. When I say this, because it's going to sound very flippant, just slap that person that says that to you, because that's not the way it works. That's not how we are. We're not this immediate or even relatively immediate. And Jeff, you're one of the first persons that I learned this from about neural pathways. They do not go away.
They're just waiting to suck you in.
Right? I mean, when I talk about new software, you're loading software on top of software.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got to be vigilant. You've got to be able to go, hold on. Wait a minute. No. This is okay. Which is one of the big reasons why I got into this, quote, business that we call Spirit of EQ, is because I want to help people understand that there are tools that you have at your disposal to be able to be vigilant.
You know, you mentioned curiosity, and the other, I don't know what word we would call it, key word that we talk about a lot, starts with a P, practice.
Yep.
Curiosity and practice. If you don't have those, you're going to stay stagnant like that stream.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly my hope that the audience and you, Jeff, myself, again, reinforcement, that we'll move forward in this in a way that brings us to breakthrough. So at that, we really appreciate everyone tuning in, and we look forward to the next time that we're together. Take care. Hi, everyone. This is Eric again. A couple of things as we've ended the show. We hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully you're tuning in on a regular basis. We'd love it if you would give us a great review on whatever platform you're listening to the podcast. It's so appreciative and helps us as we try to get more exposure for the work we do and the episodes that we publish. And we're grateful to you as a listener. The second thing is, just remember, our content is for educational purposes only. It's not intended by any stretch to diagnose or to treat anything that may be occurring in your life or anyone else's life that you may be connected to through the podcast. But once again, we appreciate you tuning in to the shows. And as always, we look forward to the next time that we're together. Take care.